When you think about global trade, you probably picture this big, orderly system of rules and tariffs. But behind that tidy exterior, there's this whole other world, a hidden world of fascinating exceptions, secret loopholes, and really high-stakes arguments. And we're not talking about some dusty old legal textbook here. These are debates that decide the fate of entire industries and sometimes even the survival of endangered species. So what happens when a country wants to protect sea turtles, but doing that actually breaks the rules of free trade? Or what if a nation bans a really dangerous product, but its trading partners cry foul, saying it's just a way to block their goods? Look, these aren't just what-if scenarios. These are real, intense battles fought every day at the World Trade Organization. Okay, so to really get into these loopholes, we gotta start with the rule book itself. Right at the center of all global commerce, there's basically one single foundational text that all 164 member countries are supposed to play by. And that rulebook is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT for short. It's been in force since 1995, and it is the bedrock treaty that governs how we trade actual physical stuff across borders. You can kind of think of it as the constitution for global trade. The whole point of GATT, right, is to make things predictable and fair. You can't play favorites with your trading partners. You can't just suddenly jack up your taxes on imports out of the blue. And you can't just slap on random quotas limiting how much stuff can come in. The goal is to create a level playing field so that trade can flow as smoothly and predictably as possible. Okay, but this is where things get really, really interesting, because built right into that same rulebook are official, totally legal ways for countries to break those exact same rules. That's right. See, the people who wrote these rules, they weren't naive. They knew life is messy. They understood that sometimes a country's other vital goals, like protecting public health or the environment, were going to crash head-on with their trade promises. So they built in a set of escape clauses. And the big one, the one everyone talks about, is Article 20, the General Exceptions Clause. It gives a very specific list of legit reasons a country can use to restrict trade. And these aren't just some vague get-out-of-jail-free cards. They are internationally recognized goals that the WTO agrees can sometimes outweigh the pure logic of free trade. But of course, you can't just yell, "I'm protecting the environment," and get away with blocking billions of dollars in imports. To stop countries from abusing this, the WTO created a crucial gatekeeper, a super strict test that every single one of these exceptions has to pass. And this is the magic phrase, the golden rule, that was established way back in a landmark 1996 case. The WTO's highest court basically said, if you want to use one of these Article 20 exceptions, you have to survive what they call a two-tiered analysis. So I want you to picture this like you're trying to get into a super high-security building. You've got two checkpoints to clear. At the first one, you have to prove your reason for being there is legit, that your trade restriction fits one of those approved reasons in Article 20, like protecting human health. But just getting past that first guard isn't enough. You then have to get past a second, much tougher checkpoint. This second checkpoint is all about something called the chapeau. And yeah, that's French for hat, because it's the little intro paragraph that sits on top of all the exceptions. And this is where the real fight happens. Your rule can't be arbitrary, it can't be unjustifiable, and this is the big one, it cannot be a disguised restriction on trade. That's the textbook definition of protectionism, using a good-sounding rule to secretly shield your own companies from foreign competition. Seriously, this is the hurdle where most countries' arguments completely fall apart. Okay, so enough theory. Let's see how this whole two-tier test actually works in the real world with some famous cases that really put these ideas to the test. All right, first up, we've got France. France decided to ban all asbestos products to protect its people from cancer, a pretty clear public health goal. But Canada, whose asbestos export industry was a huge deal, was not having it. They took France to the WTO, arguing the ban was an illegal barrier to trade. So what happened? Well, France passed that two-tier test with flying colors. The WTO panel completely agreed that protecting people from a known carcinogen was a vital and important goal. That's an easy pass on Tier 1. And here's the key. Because France banned all asbestos from everywhere, including their own producers, well, you can't really call that discriminatory, can you? So it passed the second tier, and the ban stood. A clear victory for public health. Okay, now for a more complicated one. This is a classic, the U.S. shrimp case. The U.S. wanted to protect endangered sea turtles that were getting caught in shrimp nets. So it banned shrimp imports from any country that didn't make its fishermen use special turtle-safe nets. Now, since the U.S. is a massive market for shrimp, this was a huge deal for countries like India and Malaysia, who basically said, hey, this is totally unfair. And the ruling on this one, wow, it was super nuanced. The WTO actually praised the U.S. for its goal. They said conserving an endangered species, that's a valid goal. So it passed the first tier of the test, but it failed the second. Why? Because the U.S. had applied its rule unfairly. Turns out the U.S. had been cutting deals with some countries, mostly in Latin America, giving them more time and technical help. But they didn't offer that same deal to the Asian countries who brought the case. So, the goal? Great. The way they did it? Discriminatory. Big fail on Tier 2. So, this really begs the question, right? Can you have a perfectly good reason for your rule, pass that first checkpoint, and still end up losing the entire case at the second one? Oh, absolutely. And the case of Brazil's recycled tires is the perfect example. Brazil banned imports of these tires, saying they had real health and environmental concerns about waste. That easily passed Tier 1. But, and this is a big but, they had a fatal flaw in their plan. They gave their buddies in the Mercosur trading bloc a free pass, still allowing imports from them. That was a textbook case of arbitrary discrimination, and their whole defense just crumbled at Tier 2. Okay, so we've talked about health and the environment. But what happens when a country pulls out the ultimate trump card? We're talking about national security. This is the most powerful, the most controversial, maybe the most dangerous exception in the whole rulebook. This is Article 21, the security exception. And the language here is just incredibly broad. It lets a country take any action which it considers necessary. For literally decades, everyone thought that phrase, which it considers necessary, meant it was a total blank check. A country could just declare something a security issue, and that was that. End of discussion. But then, in a huge landmark case involving Russia, a WTO panel did something nobody expected. For the very first time, they actually defined what essential security interests even means. And they defined it narrowly, tying it to the absolute core functions of a state, like protecting its territory and people from outside threats. So the message from the WTO was crystal clear. You have to use this thing in good faith. You can't just slap a national security label on a policy that's really just old-fashioned protectionism designed to help out a local industry. It was a clear shot across the bow, a warning against abusing the ultimate loophole. And that really brings us back to the central problem, the huge question that runs through all of these trade battles. In a world that's facing massive challenges, from climate change to pandemics, how do we balance a country's right to protect its own people and environment against the global rules of free trade? Where do you draw that line between legitimate protection and disguised protectionism? That's the billion-dollar or maybe trillion-dollar question at the very heart of global trade today.